Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're cracking open Chapter 4 of Kristin Neff's fantastic book, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself.
That's right.
Our mission. To really unpack this crucial concept, common humanity, it's especially relevant if you're dealing with, the stresses of college life.
Definitely.
Think of this as maybe a shortcut to understanding how feeling connected, even when you're struggling, is actually a kind of superpower for your well-being.
Exactly. And that chapter title, We're All in This Together, it really says it all. Common humanity is about, well, recognizing that we're all interconnected. We all share these basic human imperfections.
Rink.
And that's what makes self-compassion different from just, say, self-acceptance. It's understanding your place in the bigger picture. Einstein actually talked about this feeling of separateness being like a prison.
Wow, a prison.
Yeah, and he said our task is to free ourselves by widening our circle of compassion.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And the word compassion itself, it means to suffer with, right?
Well-
So it immediately suggests this shared thing.
Yeah.
When we mess up, or someone else does, we might say, it's only human.
Mm-hmm.
And that little phrase, it's like a nod to this idea that, yeah, we're all fallible. Mistakes, regrets, challenges. They aren't just your failings. They're part of being alive for everyone.
Which leads us to a really key difference. Self-compassion versus self-pity.
Yes. Good distinction.
Self-pity is all, poor me. Like your suffering is unique, somehow worse. But self-compassion, it remembers everyone suffers. The actual feeling of pain, like the hurt when things go wrong, that basic feeling is universal.
Even if the reasons are totally different for each person.
Exactly. Different triggers, different situations, but the core feeling, it's shared. Like the Rolling Stones said, you can't always get what you want. Applies to everyone.
That's such a good point. It's so easy, isn't it, when things don't go our way or we focus on something we don't like about ourselves to just get scared or angry.
Yeah, frustrating.
We sort of cling to this idea of how things should be. But the insight here, the sort of silver lining, is that seeing this struggle is shared. It changes things.
It does. It transforms it.
It goes from being this lonely burden to, like, a truth about being human.
But our default reaction when we feel shame or, inadequate, it's often to pull back. We feel isolated.
Right.
We get this emotional tunnel vision. We start thinking, I'm the only one failing this test, or I'm the only one who got dumped, or I'm the only one who feels totally clueless right now.
Yeah, that only one feeling is so strong.
And Tara Brach puts it perfectly. Feeling unworthy goes hand in hand with feeling separate.
And it's not just about faults either. Think about getting rejected for something you really wanted, an internship maybe, or getting into a certain club on campus.
Oh, yeah.
It's so easy to feel like everyone else is just sailing through, getting everything they want, and you're the odd one out.
Or even just getting sick. It can feel so unfair, like this isn't supposed to happen.
Like that story Neff tells about the 84-year-old man dying and asking, why me?
Exactly. We have this bizarre, irrational belief that things should go well all the time.
Yeah.
And when they inevitably don't, boom, isolation hits.
It really does.
And this ties right into a fundamental psychological need, the need to belong. People like Maslow, Kohut, they stress this. Feeling like you're human among humans, feeling connected. It's not just nice to have.
It's essential.
It's essential for mental health, for growth. Feeling cut off is a major source of distress, especially, I think, when you're navigating new social scenes like in college.
Oh, you feel that, don't you? That feeling of loneliness, even in a crowded room like at a party or a big campus event where you just don't feel like you fit in. Or even like the fear of public speaking. So much of that is fear of judgment, fear of being rejected, being isolated.
Absolutely.
You know that old trick, imagining the audience in their underwear? It kind of works because it's basically forcing you to see their humanity, their vulnerability. It reminds you they're imperfect too, boosts that shared humanity feeling.
And the science backs this up. Belonging seriously impacts our health, social isolation. It increases the risk of things like heart disease significantly.
Wow.
But feeling supported, having people around you, whether it's a study group or friends during a crisis, it can massively reduce anxiety, depression. It helps us face stuff.
It's that tend and befriend thing, right?
Yeah.
Our instinct to group up for safety.
Exactly. When you feel connected, those tough things, academic stress, personal problems, they just feel less scary, less overwhelming.
Yeah, more manageable.
Here's the tricky part. Even if you have great friends, supportive family, you can still feel isolated internally.
Right, inside your own head.
Yeah, our own fears, our self-judgments, they act like blinders. They make us feel uniquely messed up. And then there's the shame. Admitting we're struggling feels risky.
Especially in competitive places like college, where everyone seems to have it all together.
So we hide our true selves, which, ironically, just makes us feel even more isolated.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, right? This idea that recognizing our interconnectedness is the key.
It's the leverage point.
When you're in that moment of failure, you bombed a test, you said the wrong thing. If you can remember, hey, this happens. This is part of being human.
It shifts everything.
Yeah. The isolation turns into togetherness. The pain might still be there, but that awful feeling of being uniquely broken, it lessens.
But society often pushes us the other way, doesn't it? It tells us we need to be special, above average.
Oh, totally. The comparison trap.
Which sets up the comparison game. We measure ourselves against others constantly, and if your self-worth is tied to being better than others...
Then someone else's success feels like your failure.
Precisely.
You see that all the time in college. You get a B+ Met, you're happy. Then your friend gets an A, and suddenly your B+ feels kind of crummy.
Exactly like Liz in the book, thrilled with her 5% raise until she hears a colleague got 10%. Poof. Joy gone. Comparison is such a joy thief.
It really is.
And this competition actually pushes people away. There are studies showing that when people feel outperformed, they literally feel more distant from the person who did better. They even sit farther away.
That's wild. And so ironic.
Totally. We chase success thinking it'll bring acceptance and belonging, but the way we often compete for it actually undermines the connection we want.
And this isn't just individual. It scales up to groups, right? The whole us against them.
Definitely. Sports teams, campus groups, political affiliations.
Yeah, Americans, Republicans, Democrats, whatever group label.
These labels give us a sense of belonging within the group, for sure. But they automatically create divisions from other groups.
Makes sense.
Henri Tachfel called this social identity theory. We get self-worth from our group, so we naturally see us as good and them as less good. Or even bad.
And that's the root of so much prejudice.
Absolutely. Tachfel himself survived the Holocaust, so he knew the terrible consequences firsthand. His research showed how easily bias forms, even over totally arbitrary things, like preferring one painter over another.
Klee versus Kandinsky, wasn't it?
That's the one! People instantly favored their own arbitrarily assigned group.
But, and this is crucial, there's hope here. Psychologists found that when our sense of belonging expands, when it includes the whole human family.
Conflict decreases.
Like that study with Jewish students and forgiveness towards Germans regarding the Holocaust.
Exactly. When it was framed as humans being aggressive to other humans rather than specifically Germans towards Jews, forgiveness came more easily.
Shifting from difference to similarity changes everything.
It really does. You see it in things like the Challenge Day program Neff mentions.
Oh yeah, the line crossing exercise.
Right. Teenagers cross a line if they've experienced something painful, bullying, humiliation, whatever, and seeing almost everyone else cross the line for something, it just shatters that illusion of being alone in your pain.
Creates this instant, powerful sense of shared humanity. Compassion flows.
And that's why grounding your self-worth simply in being human is so powerful, especially when you inevitably stumble, like in college.
Because your humanity can't be taken away.
Never. Your imperfections, your struggles, they're actually your membership card to the human race. They connect you to everyone.
Okay, but we still chase perfection, don't we?
Yeah.
That illusion of perfection.
Oh, constantly. And perfectionism isn't just striving to do well. It's this compulsive need to achieve without any room for error.
It's black and white, perfect or worthless.
Which creates enormous stress, constant dissatisfaction, because, let's face it, perfection is impossible.
Like Tom, the writer in the book.
Yeah.
Successful guy, but miserable because his bestseller only hit number 23, not number 1.
Exactly. His mind could only see the failure relative to that impossible standard. It twists success into feeling inadequate. You see that with grades, career goals.
It's insidious.
And this kind of tyrannical perfectionism, it's linked to anxiety, depression, eating disorders. It looks like ambition, but it's actually really harmful.
Yeah.
Honestly, if we were perfect, we wouldn't be human. We'd be like Barbie and Ken dolls. Lifeless.
Aha!
Real, messy, warm, breathing human life is struggle and despair mixed with joy and wonder. Demanding perfection is turning your back on real life. And frankly, it's boring.
Boring.
Yeah. Like that YouTube character Kelly says, it's boring.
Yeah.
There's no story, no growth in perfection.
That's a great point. Imperfection is where the learning happens. You learn to walk by falling down.
You master a subject by wrestling with what you don't understand.
Like Wolfgang Puck said, he learned more from his one failed restaurant than all the successful ones.
Exactly. Failure sucks in the moment, obviously. It's frustrating, but it's temporary and it gives you wisdom. If you never failed, what would you learn?
Good question. Nothing, probably.
And this connects to an even deeper idea, challenging the very notion of a separate me that's solely to blame for everything.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
It's this concept of interconnectedness. Who you are, your thoughts, your feelings, your habits, even your flaws isn't just you. It's woven together with countless other people, events, conditions.
So blaming yourself gets complicated.
Very. Think about it. Did you choose your genes, your family environment growing up, the culture you were born into, the specific pressures you face right now at college?
No, of course not.
So if you struggle with, say, procrastination or anxiety, is that 100% your fault? Or is it a complex result of all these interacting factors?
It's a profound way to think about it.
Yeah.
Because if we really had total control, wouldn't we have just switched off the anxiety or procrastination by now?
Exactly. We'd all be perfectly balanced, productive Zen masters if it were that simple. So, knowing we don't have that absolute control, why are we judging ourselves so harshly?
Good point.
We are fundamentally expressions of everything that came before us and surrounds us now. Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing.
The cloud and the sheet of paper idea.
That's the one. The paper can't exist without the cloud, the rain, the sun, the logger, the factory. It's all connected. Our families, our genes, our culture, our friends, they all shape who we are.
It feels a bit scary, though, that idea. Like losing control.
I get that. But maybe the illusion of complete personal control is actually the harmful thing. It's what fuels the self-judgment, the blame.
So instead of seeing ourselves as these fixed, independent units.
Think of yourself more like a weather pattern. A hurricane gets a name, but it's just a temporary phenomenon arising from specific atmospheric conditions. We're like that, constantly changing, arising from food, water, air, genes, experiences, relationships, an intricate web.
And seeing that web helps us not take our personal failings so personally.
Exactly. It helps us see them as outcomes of countless causes and conditions, many outside our control. It fosters less judgment for ourselves and for others. It brings compassion for the fact that we're all just doing the best we can with the hand we've been dealt.
Okay, but then someone might ask, wait, what's wrong with judgment? We need it for right and wrong, don't we?
Yes. That's the difference between judgment and what Neff calls discriminating wisdom.
Discriminating wisdom.
Wisdom absolutely recognizes when actions cause harm. It sees injustice. But it also seeks to understand the causes and conditions that led to those actions. It doesn't just condemn, it tries to understand the why.
Which allows for a different kind of response.
Yes, one that can potentially break cycles of conflict and blame rather than just perpetuating them.
Like the example of the young man who robbed the bank and shot the teller.
Right. The initial reaction is judgment. He's a monster. Understandable.
But then you learn his history. Drug-addicted parents living on the street since childhood, can't read or write.
And suddenly, while the action is still horrific and unacceptable, compassion creeps in. Your stance softens. You see the tragic web of causes and conditions.
It doesn't excuse the crime.
Not at all. Responsibility remains. But it allows for deeper understanding, retains respect for his basic humanity, and maybe even allows for the possibility of change if circumstances were different. It's like what Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone," or "Forgive them, they know not what they do." It's about seeing the bigger picture.
Okay, let's make this practical. There's an exercise in the book, right, about letting go of self-definitions.
Yes, exercise 1, identifying our interconnectedness.
So, for everyone listening, think for a second about a trait you judge yourself for. Maybe feeling shy in class, or lazy about studying, or getting angry easily under pressure. Got one. Okay, now ask yourself, first, how often do you really show this trait? All the time? Or just sometimes? Who are you when you don't show it?
Good question.
Second, are there specific situations that bring it out and others where it's just not there? If circumstances matter, can it really define your whole self?
Makes you think.
Third, think about the causes and conditions.
Yeah.
Family stuff, genetics, pressures you're under right now. If outside forces shape this trait, is it fair to see it as only about your inner self?
Probably not.
Fourth, did you consciously choose this trait? Do you always have total control over it? If not, maybe ease up on the harsh judgment. And finally, try reframing. Instead of, "I am a shy person," Maybe try. Sometimes in certain situations I feel shy. Can you feel a bit more breathing room with that? Less rigid.
It definitely creates more space, more freedom.
Right. It shows we're all subject to these human limitations. It reminds me of that quote by Jerome K. Jerome.
Oh, the one about faults.
Yeah, it is in our faults and failings, not in our virtues, that we touch each other and find sympathy. Our shared imperfections are actually what connect us.
Exactly. And recognizing that shared imperfection, that common humanity, is what fulfills that deep need to belong right inside ourselves.
Kristin Neff shares a really moving personal story about this with her son Rowan's autism diagnosis.
Yes, it's very powerful.
She talks about the initial denial, the grief,
Yeah.
and that creeping feeling of self-pity. Why me? This isn't fair. Other parents have it easy.
That feeling of isolation again.
But then she consciously used self-compassion, specifically common humanity. She was at the park, watching Rowan, feeling that, poor me.
And she shifted her focus.
Yeah. She looked around and deliberately thought about all parents, all families facing some kind of challenge. Maybe not autism, but maybe depression, illness, money worries, a child struggling with something else. She even thought about parents in really difficult circumstances, like in developing countries.
She widened her circle of compassion.
Exactly. And two things happened. First, she felt this profound connection to just the unpredictable, messy reality of being human. All the struggles, all the joys.
Less alone.
Way less alone. And second, her own situation suddenly felt different. Still hard, but she saw it in perspective. It could always be worse. And that sense of equanimity, that wasn't resignation.
No, it gave her the clarity to act.
Right. It allowed her to move past the disappointment and just love and support Rowan for who he was.
And it brings up that question, what is normal anyway?
Good point.
Being human means being exactly as life creates you with your unique mix of strengths, weaknesses, gifts, challenges. Accepting the human condition, in all its imperfection, is the key to accepting ourselves and others.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the core takeaway from this chapter on common humanity is pretty profound.
It really is.
It's this realization that your struggles, your flaws, your difficult moments,
Yeah.
they don't make you isolated or broken. They're actually the shared threads connecting you to everyone else.
Beautifully put. By seeing that interconnectedness, you can step out of that harsh self-judgment, that painful feeling of being alone.
And step into a deeper sense of belonging, extending compassion not just inward, but outward too.
To yourself and to everyone else trying to figure out this life thing.
So for you listening, especially navigating college life, how might things shift if you started seeing your own pressures? The academic stress, the social anxieties, the setbacks, not as personal failures, but as part of this shared human experience.
What if those very imperfections are what make you human, what allow you to connect, to grow, to learn?
Maybe the most compassionate thing we can do then is just remember.
We really are all in this together.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.